Well, hello for another video of mine. I'm going to give you a little background about what's going on in my life at the moment. I've just really finished the first major stage of the Isle of Man project. The idea is the Isle of Man's 85,000 people, that's all. So it's like a small town in the UK. And I thought if I could influence a change there, it's a really good chance because it's so small, you can get to people. And the Isle of Man people turned up in big numbers for my meeting, and it went down very well. I appeared on the government-owned Manx radio system for that Green Party leader, where I had an hour of being insulted without the chance to respond. But nevertheless, I've done videos on that. And I did an hour's podcast there and other interviews. Anyway, as I got hold of more information in the Isle of Man, it became evident that they're living in Cloud Cuckoo Land. They're estimating 200 to 300% more energy from their wind farm proposal than is possible than anyone else gets. They're even almost twice as much as the offshore wind farm by them. It is totally impossible to justify. So I really pinned them into a corner in this eventually. And you know what they do? They refuse to respond, the government and the Manx utilities, who are government-owned. The MUA and the government both refuse to respond. The government now will not even be interviewed by their media, by their independent media parts, refuse to be interviewed, and will only release interviews with their own PR people, which sounds like a dictatorship. So before I move on, and obviously it's not over yet, the Manx story, but it's been a tremendous amount of effort for my part. When I know there's a limited interest in Manx, I don't get the big viewing numbers. Not that it makes any difference, because I don't get paid for viewing numbers anyway. But I've got a new symbol for them now after this action. And here it is. This replaces the three-legged Manx coat of arms. And here's my Paul Burgess awarded symbol for the Isle of Man and the MUA, that's the Manx Utilities Authority. Okay, so let's move on. I really could have done with a rest after the Manx episodes and the work that went into that. But life moves on, and my worst nightmare has happened, which is Ed Milliband becoming our energy minister. He's an eco-fanatic of the highest order. And at the same time, I was contacted by the Calderdale people who want me to work and help the Calderdale Wind Farm objections, as it were. And I didn't want to do it because on the 27th of July this year, I'm appearing to give a talk to tens of thousands of people in Trafalgar Square, and I'm talking on the climate. And I've actually spent weeks preparing just a 2-minute video, which is a preamble to my 5-minute talk, to try to get a big message across about climate. So it's a very intensive 2 minutes I've put in there. How can I get the message across? And I've enjoyed doing it almost. That's happening on the 27th of July in Trafalgar Square. In the meantime, I've had to say yes to a number of proposals that are going on in my life. And I'm 79, so it's a bit tiring at times, and it's driving the missus a bit crazy. But I thought, well, yeah, I'll do a quickie on Calderdale, which is, the facts are that every single wind and solar farm in the UK lies about how many homes it can supply. Well, it totally deceives you. That's the best way to put it. I've explained this before, but I'll explain it again. But I've got to combine it with what's happening with Ed Milliband. So this is, it's a totally logically linked together video, the subjects. But I will start off with the Calderdale proposal and how, just like every other wind and solar farm, it's deceiving you. So we'll do that, and then we'll move on to Ed Milliband, because it's really serious, the matter, and it's going to cost everyone a fortune. I mean, a real fortune, this, and I'll show you what's wrong, and we're being led by idiots. I know there won't be the money there to do what they're proposing. I know Ed Milliband can't survive in this role. If he does, the government won't survive. So it's up to them. But it really is depressing to have someone like that in charge of our energy, and mainly in charge of your pocket. My goodness, are you going to get huge bills in the future? Are you going to be locked into them for decades? So let's get on with, first of all, the Calderdale and the normal wind farm misleading. So here we go. Here it is. A unique opportunity for Calderdale. Yes, a unique opportunity to totally destroy a beautiful area of Yorkshire. A unique opportunity to have lots of nice pylons stretching across Britain and places like this. A unique opportunity to kill yet more wildlife and birds and bats and insects. A unique opportunity to shred microplastics from those wind vanes everywhere. Great. Lots of unique opportunities here. But what do they claim? Because let's first of all demolish the silly claims these wind farms make. And it's the same as every other wind farm, by the way, but we'll go into this one. So this is from their website, and we'll take these two claims here. Up to 302 megawatts of renewable electricity generated. And the next one alongside it, enough renewable electricity to power up to 310,372 homes a year. Wow, that's a lot of homes. Let's look at those claims quickly. Well, the question is, how much energy do we actually get out in a year from this wind farm? And to explain that, I've got to explain the load factor. But don't worry if you don't understand it, just take the end result. The load factor is very simple. In a perfect world, 302 megawatts of wind power would generate every hour 8,760 hours in a year. So it would generate 2,645,520 megawatt hours a year, which is 2,645 gigawatt hours a year. So that's how much in a perfect world if the wind blew all the time. But the wind does not blow perfectly every second, so we get a percentage called a load factor. And let's say for a moment the load factor is 25.6%. You'll see why in a minute. You would get out 2,645 times 25.6% is 677.12 gigawatt hours. So that's what you get out in a year from this wind farm. So let's understand why we use that load factor. Well, here's the British government making statements about load factors on wind farms in the UK. Scotland is the highest onshore wind load factor, then Wales, followed closely by Northern Ireland at 26.8, and England 25.6. That's where I got it from. England continues to have the highest load factor for offshore wind, 40%, followed by Wales 33.6, and Scotland 32.9. But here we're talking onshore, so we're talking about 25.6%. And it can vary by the location, but only by 1 or 2%. It's not very much. So this is a very good estimate of what energy we're going to get out of this wind farm. So there we are. We get out 677,000 megawatt hours a year. But that divided by 310,372 homes equals just 2.18 megawatt hours a year per home. So how much power does the average home need? Well, according to Ofgem, they state 2.7 megawatt hours a year for electric and 11.5 megawatt hours a year for gas. The total is 14.2 megawatt hours of energy. So the wind farm supplies just 15.3% of the energy for the average home. So if you're thinking they could power 372 homes, no, they can't. In actual fact, it's going to get much worse than this. But at this point in the calculation, it is clear they just supply just over 15% of the energy to the average home. So a truthful statement would read, Calderdale Wind Farm can supply 310,372 homes, providing that about 85% of the energy is supplied by gas, that we're trying to do away with, of course, and 100% is supplied by gas when the wind is not blowing. But it gets worse. And it gets much worse. There's the next factor, and there's a few factors to take into account now. The next factor is the actual price you're paying for the wind. At the moment, gas is £65 a megawatt hour, and that price is artificially inflated high because it's now being used as backup to the wind. That gets worse with time. And it's about 25% of the gas price is there because of the wind being there. I'll explain. Basically, a gas power plant now has to be ready to step up and step down with the wind. It needs all the same staff, it needs the same overheads, the same structures, it has to waste gas in doing that, ready to go. And by the time you're finished, it adds 25% or so to the price of gas. So it should be in the 40s, the price of gas, if we didn't have the wind. And the facts are wind and gas together are a disaster for costs. That's a fact. And gas is the only thing that can back it up. But on to the next one. The next one is the actual price you're paying. So wind onshore is £89 a megawatt hour, much more expensive than gas. Offshore is £102 a megawatt hour. Much more expensive again. And I know Ed Milliband wants to do it, but floating offshore, £246 a megawatt hour. Be insane to do that. So already you're paying right through the nose in multiple ways in a totally distorted power grid because of this renewable, what they call renewable, it isn't really, but this wind power. So now, a true statement at this point would be Calderdale Wind Farm can supply 310,372 homes, providing that about 85% of energy is supplied by gas and 100% supplied by gas when the wind's not blowing, and you accept the inflated gas price, and you pay a premium over that of 37% for wind. But it gets even worse than that. Guess what's coming next? Now, this is really the sting in the tail. This is big. There's a thing called constraint payments with wind and solar. And what it means is this, that when, let's say overnight, when demand drops, as it does in this pattern, this is a typical pattern overnight, demand drops, but there's a lot of wind, then they still have to pay for them not to produce the wind. In other words, you pay for the wind power they could have produced, even though we didn't need it. It's called a constraint payment. Now, in this example here, look at this point. It's nearly all gas and no wind. The wind's green, the gas is blue. Nearly, the wind had died down, nearly all gas. However, look at this overnight point here, where the amount of wind is high. Now imagine what Ed Milliband wants to do is quadruple offshore and double onshore wind. The net result will be this green curve could be very much higher than the overnight peaks, and you'd be paying for it. In fact, you could be paying 3 times the price in some nights because there's good wind, all the wind farms can produce, we don't need it, but we still have to pay them. This is madness, and it's going to get much worse. The first part of that constraint is the con part is very true, because you have to pay that. In some Scottish wind farm cases, as here, 51% of the time the energy is paid for to not give it to us. There's an example there. But that's mainly due to the distribution of problems from Scotland. I mean, what sort of government puts in wind farms you can't get the energy from? Look at these constraint payments here. But the problem now is this, as we double our onshore wind and quadruple our offshore wind, as Ed Milliband is planning, overnight we're going to have tremendous amounts of wind power we don't need, huge amounts of constraint payments. And it's going to become, you could be paying 3 or 4 times over overnight because it's windy and everyone's producing at their great high rate and you're not needing it. You couldn't make this up. This is an enormous growing problem. Now, as we add more wind, the problem gets worse. So each new wind farm is going to be paid more and more of the time not to give us the energy. I know that sounds unbelievable given all the rest of the things we've explained here, but this is the basic truth. And I've just used Calderdale as an example. The same issue applies to every wind and solar farm in the UK. And as if to add insult to injury, £60 billion is being spent on the national grid in the next 5 years to link the renewables to the grid. That's £12 billion a year on top of the costs I've already shown. And some people will be screaming storage. Well, there isn't any. Batteries are completely out of the question, absolutely out of the question on cost. And even hydrogen, well, a group of MPs have just drawn a correct conclusion this month. They've examined it and said the only real application for hydrogen is in niche industrial processes. And I agree, it's not viable. Besides which, you'd have to use a lot more energy making the hydrogen than you get out of it. So this is the real world we have to live in, not some make-believe about future things. And of course, you've got Ed Milliband going on about hydrogen, about burying CO2 and all these mad things. I mean, I know the money's not there for him to do it. I know he's going to have the brakes put on him, and it's going to be very interesting to see how long he lasts. Because if they don't put the brakes on him, this will bring down a government. But the worst part about this is you are being asked to continue to pay for decades to come very high energy prices, and the whole fundamental basis of any economy is cheap energy. If we have cheap energy, we have a thriving economy. It's as simple as that. Now, I was going to carry on actually in this video to go on about the new Great British Energy Company, which is total bonkers madness and other things. But I'm just going to end with Ed Milliband. There's a little clip here from The Independent of him playing the ukulele because he's so excited about wind farms. And all I'm going to tell you is you can see it's blowing your money away. That's what it's blowing. And that's the only thing it's really blowing. So I'll end with that, and I'll make the next bit of Ed Milliband in another video. Thank you for watching.
The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. So here I am, on the latest stage of my GB Energy Tour, and I'm near Mansfield at the Lyndhurst Wind Farm. Now, these turbines behind me provide power for 5,000 homes. They were built in 2010. But here's the bad news.